Tzitzis HaParsha, sparks or tidbits on the weekly Torah portion. This week, the portion is called Bo, based on the first key word of this Parsha. And as the Rebbe would always teach us, the name of the Parsha is not just the first word or the first important word, but it really captures the essence of the whole Parsha. What does the word Bo mean? Come. Come to Pharaoh. Come to the king. And the question is asked, why does it use the word Bo, come, and other places it says Lech, go to Pharaoh? And the answer is that here God is telling Moshe, come with me to Pharaoh. Because at this point, Moshe was afraid of entering into Pharaoh's inner sanctum, because this would represent an awesome spiritual challenge for him, and he needed God's support. There's a interesting comment by the Chiddushei HaRim, the first Rebbe of the Gerer Hasidic dynasty, and he says that Moshe was embarrassed to go. Why? Because, as the Torah continues, come to Pharaoh, for I have made his heart and the heart of his servants stubborn, so that I can put these signs of mine in his midst. And at first glance, that sounds very strange. Come to Pharaoh. Why? Because I hardened his heart. But that's a reason not to go to Pharaoh. If his heart is hardened, then he's not going to listen. It should have said that even though his heart is hardened, you should still go to him. But it doesn't say that. It says, why should you go to him? Because I hardened his heart. So that is a question that many commentators ask. Rashi seems to be explaining that God wanted him to not let the Jews go at this point so he could toy with Pharaoh. And others explain it that this was an opportunity for God to bring more miracles, and that way we would have more to tell our children, more greater wonders that God wrought. But Chiddushei HaRim says that no, Moshe was afraid to go to Pharaoh because he was embarrassed. What could he be embarrassed about? What made him feel uncomfortable going to Pharaoh? And Chiddushei HaRim explains that Pharaoh had demonstrated such stubbornness, so obstinate, notwithstanding all the pressure that was put on him, notwithstanding the pain to which he was subjected, as well as the rest of the Egyptian people. And he still stood firm in his convictions, no, I will not let them go. So Moshe said to himself, wow, this is an incredible talent, to have such stubbornness, to stand firm regardless of the pressure. That is a trait that I don't have. I didn't display that stubbornness, that obstinacy, that tenacity, stick-to-itiveness, stiff-neckedness, to use a few more adjectives. When God tells me to go and liberate the Jewish people, and I go and it backfires, at least it seemed that way, things that got worse for the Jewish people, I complained. I didn't have that firm tenacity to say, no matter what will happen, I am not going to question God's ability to take them out of Egypt. And no matter how it seems to be going the wrong way, it's not something that should deter me in any way. And I didn't do that. I had questions. I hesitated. And here Pharaoh, when it comes to his convictions, now Moshe was looking at an evil person. Why would he be embarrassed from an evil person? And the answer to that is that we have to learn lessons from everything. Baal Shem Tov taught us that everything that we hear or see has to teach us a lesson in our service to God. Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, the famous Hasidic master, says there are 7 things we could learn from a thief. Though it's a person who's committing a crime, but we could learn things about the attitudes that the criminal brings to his trade, his profession. We can learn from everybody. In Ethics of the Fathers it says, who is a wise person? The one who learns from everybody. And Moshe therefore thought, if Pharaoh was able to exhibit such stubbornness when it came to his convictions, how could it be that I did not have the same level of commitment? So he was embarrassed to go to Pharaoh. And God says, no, don't be embarrassed. Pharaoh does not have that trait of stubbornness. He's a weakling. He's a nobody. I hardened his heart. Therefore, you don't have to be embarrassed. There's an interesting hint in the words, Bo el Paro, come to Pharaoh. The word Bo and the word Pharaoh, Paro, if you add it up numerically, it gives you the number 358, which is the numerical value of Mashiach. And the significance of that is that when people ask, how do we believe that Mashiach could come so soon? I mean, this is a revolution, and people don't anticipate revolutions, although that's a mistake because no one anticipated the collapse of the Soviet Union, and when it happened, it took everyone by surprise. Revolutions could happen suddenly without us expecting it. But nevertheless, people feel uncomfortable with the idea that something could radically change our lives in the negative way and also in the positive way. And the answer to that is, at least a partial answer is, Mashiach's coming didn't start today. It started the moment that God says to Moshe, come to Pharaoh. Coming to Pharaoh and initiating the process of the redemption already planted the seeds for the future redemption. So the process of the Messianic age, the redemption, the ultimate final redemption, already began when they went to Pharaoh. Had the Jewish people left Egypt completely free, spiritually, then that would have been the ultimate redemption. But because they had still been tainted by the impurity of Egypt, and as our sages tell us, they had stooped to the 49th level of impurity, and there were only 50 levels. Had they been kept in Egypt a moment longer, they would have fallen to the 50th level, and it would have been impossible to liberate them. They would have been lost. So when they left Egypt, they didn't leave Egypt fully spiritually free, and that's why we were able to go back into exile. But the dynamic power of liberation, of the Exodus, of redemption, including the final redemption, began with Bo Paro, come to Pharaoh. Now, last week, Moses brings to Pharaoh 7 plagues, 7 of the 10 plagues. In this week's Torah portion, we have the last 3 plagues. Number 1, Arba, locust. Number 2, Choshech, darkness. Number 3, the plague of the firstborn. Now these 3 plagues, if we examine them, we can see a deeper meaning behind them. That they reflect what is wrong with Golus, with exile, and how it's going to be remedied by Mashiach in the future redemption. And we'll start off with the premise that exile is a state of mind in which we do not see reality. Golus literally means to be alienated, to be exiled. But alienated is not just a geographic term, it's also a conceptual term, an ideological term. You could be alienated from reality. Today we're living in a world of virtual reality, but the truth is that in exile everything is virtual reality. We don't see things, and the way we don't see things manifests itself in 3 ways. Number 1, we don't see the whole picture. When we look at something that is happening, we look at an event, we only see one slice of that event. We do not see the whole picture. A second impediment that we have in exile is that even if we see a large slice of the picture, even that slice itself, we only see its relative importance or its relative meaning. We don't see its intrinsic, we don't see beneath the surface what it's really all about. And the third thing, that even when we see something that might be a little bit of truth, a little bit of authenticity, it doesn't last. It doesn't have endurance. So those are the three characteristics of exile. Number one, we don't see the whole picture. It's like the famous analogy the Rebbe would give. Someone is blindfolded and brought into a room and the mask is removed and he sees masked people ready to take a knife and stab someone, and he's ready to stop and scream, "What are you doing? You're going to kill him." But he's told that it was an operating room and they're surgeons trying to save the life of the patient. What was wrong with his vision? He saw exactly what anyone else could have seen. His vision was 20/20, but he didn't see the events before and the events after. He didn't see the sign saying operating room. If he had seen the whole picture, he wouldn't have reacted that way. Well, that's how we look at life in exile. We see only one slice of the picture. There's a famous picture that showed up about 10, 15, 20 years ago of a Palestinian kid throwing a pebble at a group of Israelis with machine guns and tanks. And the idea of that picture, which spread all over the world, was to demonstrate the David and the Goliath scene. That David were the Palestinian children and Goliath were the Israelis. But then a Jewish newspaper printed the real picture, the whole picture. And the whole picture, you saw about 20 photojournalists crouched taking a picture of this event. It was a staged event. If you didn't see the whole picture, you saw David and a Goliath scene. When you saw the whole picture, you realized they brought this kid there, telling him to hold his hand in a motion as if he's throwing a rock. It was all staged, because you don't see the whole picture. That's Golus, that's exile. That is represented by the plague of locusts. One of the things about locusts, the way the Torah describes it, is that you couldn't see the earth, because they cover the whole eye of the earth. That means covering the eye of the earth means covering the vision. The way we see the world was covered up with this plague. And what is the remedy? The redemption is that just like this locust covered up the whole expanse of the land, there was a panoramic view of the whole earth covered up with locusts, so will there be a world covered up with godliness. But then there's a second aspect of exile, which was represented by the plague of darkness, where you don't see things. You see them, but you don't see their inner meaning. You don't see their intrinsic value. And that's one of the problems that we have, that we look at another person, we see their surface, we see their exterior. We look at money and we see its relative value. We don't see anything in terms of its intrinsic value. In the time of redemption, we will see the true meaning of everything. What happened in the plague of darkness, the Midrash tells us, the Jews were able to go into the Egyptian homes and find the treasures there, which they later on asked the Egyptians to give them. That means, in a spiritual sense, in the Messianic age, we will be able to see all the treasures that exist in this world. We will see the true, deeper meaning to everything that exists in this world. And then the third characteristic of exile is there's no continuity. Even the things that are real, even when we get a glimpse, a taste of reality, of truth, it doesn't last, it doesn't endure. That's the plague of the firstborn, where the firstborn, which represent the continuity of a tradition, of a legacy, ceased to exist. It stopped. It did not carry on. And, of course, the parallel to that would be in the Messianic age. Not only will we be exposed to reality, we'll see the whole picture, we'll see the deeper side of everything, the context and the subtext. We will also see the continuity. Everything will last forever. life will be eternal. The dead will come back to life. The plague of darkness is described in the Torah, and one did not see his brother, and no one could get up. One of the Hasidic masters explains, when people come to the state where you cannot see your brother, when you don't see him or her, brother or sister, and his or her needs, you only see, again, the exterior, then no one can get up. Then you have really essentially reached the nadir of morality, of decency, and it's going to be impossible for you to get up. The importance of seeing the other person, not just seeing their physical features, but seeing their needs, seeing what's lacking, seeing what you can do for them, that is the hallmark of a person living in a world of redemption. When you don't see, that's a feature of exile, of Golus. After the 10 plagues, when Pharaoh tells Moses to take them, let the Jews go, God gives the Jewish people the first commandment as a people. Now there were other commandments in the Torah, be fruitful and multiply, that was given to Adam and Noah. Then there was circumcision given to Abraham, and then there was not eating the sciatic nerve of an animal given to Jacob and his children. But those were given to individuals, even though later on they were reiterated at Sinai and given to all the Jewish people. But the first commandment that was given specifically to the Jewish people, as a people in Egypt, was the commandment about the Jewish calendar. HaChodesh Hazel Lochem Rosh Chodesh. That's chapter 12, verse 2. This month shall be for you the beginning of the months. It shall be for you the first of the months of the year. And this is the basis of the Jewish calendar that we declare each month based on the testimony of witnesses, and then the courts declare that day to be the first day of the month. If the witnesses don't come, then the courts postpone the declaration of Rosh Chodesh to the next day, and that will determine when Jewish holidays will be. Now we follow a calendar, and you might think, well, calendar is more sophisticated. No. The ideal mitzvah, which will be restored in the Messianic age, is to do it month by the sighting of the moon, as a way of demonstrating that God entrusted the power to create time to us. It's through our efforts that we could change not only the physical objects by using them for something good, something holy, but even time is in our hands. We control time. That is a testimony to the supernatural status that we enjoy. Now, it's interesting, again, to go into the world of gematria, of numerology. The words HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, this is the month unto you, numerically adds up to 424, which is the same numerical value as the words Mashiach ben David, Mashiach the son of David. Because there's a story in the Talmud that when they had to sanctify the new moon, and it was not so safe for them to do it, to determine that the moon was sanctified, they sent the message, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim. David, the king of Israel, lives forever. What connection does the sanctification of the new moon have to King David? It's a very strong connection, because the Jewish people are likened to the moon. The moon waxes, but then it wanes. The Jewish people also have waxed in their growth and development up until the time of King David and King Solomon, and then we went downhill. Our light, our fortunes have waned, and we keep on going, waxing and waning. And that's why we're in exile. We don't have this eternal process of waxing. We still have the waning. In the Messianic age, that light of the moon, it says, will be as strong as the light of the sun, and even more so, because what that means is that we will no longer have the phenomenon of waning. And that is symbolized by King David, that even though King David is no longer here physically, but his royalty, his position, is here forever, and it will materialize in his descendant, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach the son of David, who will restore the light of the moon to its original state. When I mean original state, when God created the sun and the moon, we're told that they were both equal. And the moon complained, we can't have two kings. And God says, okay, diminish yourself. It was all part of the process of creation for the moon to be diminished, which set into motion the process where the Jewish people could be exiled, but ultimately God will restore the moon to its original position. And all that is an allusion to the future Mashiach ben David. We get to the end of the Torah portion when Moses threatens the plague of the firstborn. He calls the time for the plague to occur chatzos, midnight. That's when it happened. But Moses didn't say midnight, he says kichatzos, like midnight, around midnight. Why couldn't he just say midnight? Because that's what God said, it will happen at midnight. So the Talmud tells us, and Rashi quotes this, that Moses was concerned that the astrologers of Pharaoh would be looking at their watches and seeing, well, it's midnight, they would make a mistake, their watches wouldn't be accurate, and the plague didn't happen. So they say, you see, this whole thing is above a mice, it's all a fairy tale, this is not really a miracle. But that begs a question. You mean, if the plague of the firstborn would have happened, even according to that miscalculation, 2 minutes after midnight, would that have diminished the plague? So why was it so important to make sure that they won't argue that this plague was not really the way it was predicted? 2 minutes after midnight is close enough, and the plague was horrible enough to motivate them to let the Jews go. So one commentary gives this very interesting explanation. He quotes the Rambam, Maimonides, who describes the difference between Jewish prophets and the false prophets of other pagan religions, who also have people who would predict the future, astrologers and so on. He says, what's the difference? One salient difference is that when someone is speaking in the name of God, everything he says will come true. If one detail doesn't materialize, that proves that he's not really a prophet of God. Well, these Egyptian sorcerers and magicians and astrologers, they felt that Moses was really one of them. He had the same category of power that they had. Maybe better, maybe stronger, maybe more professional, maybe superior to them, but basically cut of the same material. He was also a sorcerer. He also had ways of bringing about the powers of impurity that had these abilities to perform all these miracles. If that was true, then they felt, why should we submit to this? Eventually we will find ways of competing with Moses and overcoming his power. But of course Moses was telling them, no, this is not my power, this is God's power. This is one God who transcends all of the powers and forces of nature. But they were not totally convinced. And even if they were convinced, if anything would happen that would undermine that, then that would undo the whole purpose of the plagues. The purpose of the plagues, as we mentioned in an earlier class, was not just to punish them, but also to educate them about the existence of one God who's the creator of heaven and earth, creator of nature, and controls nature. So if Moses would have said midnight and their watches whatever method they used to tell time, would have said it's 2 minutes before, 2 minutes after midnight, they would have said, yeah, Moses, you're pretty smart, you have a lot of power, but you're no different from us. This is not your God that you speak about, because if it was your God, it would be precise. There would be nothing that would not materialize in accordance with that prediction. And that's why Moses, to avoid that distortion, said it's going to happen around midnight, so they have no way of casting any doubts about Moses' prophecy. Just want to conclude that this week, Thursday night and Friday is Yud Shvat, the 10th day of the month of Shvat. That is the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, passed away physically from this world in 1950. And that same day, obviously, God does not leave us without a leader. Our Rebbe became the leader on the 10th of Shvat of 1950, but he only accepted formally the leadership a year later, a year and a day later, the 11th of Shvat of 1951. And this is a day that we gather and we review the discourse that the previous Rebbe issued to be studied on that day, in which reference is made to a midrash that refers to this world as God's garden, and that God had dwelt in this garden when he created the world, only to be withdrawn from it through the sins of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and so on and so forth, up until the time of Abraham. God had withdrawn 7 levels to the 7th heaven. And through Abraham's efforts and Isaac and Jacob and a total of 7 generations, culminated with Moses, God was brought back into this world. That means God gave this world the potential to realize its God-given existence. And those 7 generations, as I said, culminated with Moses receiving the Torah and building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in which God would dwell. And the Rebbe said that from the time of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, there's also a process of 7 generations, and we are the 7th generation, and our task is to bring the divine presence into this world in a way that will manifest itself as the Messianic age. And that is our task as the 7th generation. So may everyone have a good evening and a good Shabbos and a meaningful Yud Shvat.